Oh, well, Steve. Been a little while.
Yeah.
It's always a hectic 6 weeks, trying to be a dad in June when school's out and also cover recruiting, which is insane in the month of June and into July. But I'm not complaining, right? I got a cool job. So going well. Can't complain, man.
I will get to the recruiting part in a moment. You closely follow television. What kind of quandary has it been for Penn State with a whiteout game in conjunction with the networks?
Yeah, this has been a popular topic lately, right? And, I feel like it's been a popular topic for a couple of years now, but, James and even Pat Kraft have been kind of outspoken in some interviews we've done with them recently about, how the Big Ten could maybe, help Penn State out a little bit when it comes to, having big-time games in the evening, when they want their whiteout. So, we don't really know officially when Ohio State will be, but I think everybody kind of understands that that'll probably be penciled in for noon. And, between UCLA and Washington, again, we don't really know those times officially yet, but the fact that people have been kind of outspoken about it kind of leads you to believe that maybe they aren't going to be night games. Or at least with UCLA, we'll see. Washington's late in the year. Who knows, with those November games. But, it's been interesting, man, because this is not something that Penn State wants. But, at the same time, all of these Big Ten schools, except for the new ones, of course, are getting paid out pretty handsomely. And hey, look, if you look at Big Noon's ratings, they've been pretty solid. So it's going to be interesting. I think Penn State certainly wants the Big Ten and Fox and NBC and CBS to kind of work with them a little bit more moving forward. But, when it comes to this year specifically, I'm not sure exactly what all they can do.
Yeah, it should be pointed out that of the top 15 rated college football games last season, 7 of them took place in the noon hour. So, so that's the Fox point of view. The Penn State point of view is they're number 6 in total viewership from 2016 to 2023, and they happen to be one of the 18 schools that make up 50% of the TV ratings. So both sides have an argument.
Right. And that's why we're at a quandary.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting, man. I think I could see a route down the road where maybe the networks will work with them a little bit. The whiteout is still absolutely a desired telecast. But, if you want that to be Ohio State, if you want that to be Michigan, even maybe an Oregon or some other team that's very prominent, USC, of course, now, look, Fox is always going to have the opportunity to take those games very early. Just the way this draft works and all types of little details that we could spend all day about. I don't know if it's going to come down to Fox kind of putting his tail between his legs and letting NBC, jump the line for one of those games. We saw that this year. That's been kind of announced already publicly that, Fox kind of gave NBC an opportunity to move up a little bit in the draft while they got, later games. I think Fox got 2 out of that. It was like a 2-for-1 kind of trade with NBC. Maybe we see something like that moving forward. Maybe we see the Big Ten kind of give a little bit there with Penn State. Of course, the Michigan, Ohio State, and that game always being at noon is what Franklin kind of keeps pointing to. So we will see. But right now, I feel like that's a fix that they could maybe make in 2025, 2026, something that can be negotiated or talked about here in the next coming months. But for this season, I kind of just feel like it's a little too late for much to change. The draft's already been done, and Penn State has to figure out what game. There's a reason Penn State hasn't announced their whiteout yet, or any of their their themes for this year. And I think a lot of it comes down to they know that they don't have a lot of great options for what they really want, and we'll see if that comes soon. I know they want to get that out soon, but there's a reason they've been taking a little while to put it out there.
I want to ask you one more TV question, then I'll get to the recruiting part. Everyone talks about realignment. We know about Florida State and how vocal they've been about they need to leave the ACC and so forth. In reality, Ryan, how much TV money is actually left out there? Because contracts are already signed, and it's not a bottomless pit of money across the board. Doesn't common sense enter into this argument at some point? Because there seems to be a lot of emotion and no common sense.
For sure. Absolutely. I think that's a great point. Look, let's be honest. There was a lot of talk that Fox wanted in on the 12-team college playoff. Why didn't they get in? It's not really been out there too much publicly, but I think it's a lot had to do with the fact that they added a couple schools to the Big Ten, and money is tight. And we've already seen what ESPN's had to do in different ways and cut staff or whatever it may be in different ways to be able to pay out those television contracts that, don't get me wrong, the NBA is going to get more. The NBA is about to be up. I think there's one other. It's not NFL. The NHL's good. I think the NBA is the other big one that's coming up there as far as ESPN.
They're going to, in essence, they're going to double the number from 1.4 to 2.8 billion per year, because for ESPN there's a nice to have and there's a must have. Well, the NBA is a must have, so they had to pay for it.
For sure. And I mean, look, there's I have a question, Steve. Has the 14-team playoff been worked out? Like, is that all still with ESPN, or is it just the 12-team? Have they figured out the college football playoff will be with ESPN 14 through like 2030s?
That part's been worked out. Now, whether it gets to 14 or not, I think they're still debating it. But the long-term contract's been worked out with ESPN, and they in turn are going to farm out 2 of the games in the 12-team playoff to TNT.
Mm-hmm. Right. So, look, unless if Turner decides they want to really get in on some of this college football action, maybe they do. We'll see. Obviously, right now they only have 2 college football playoff games. But, no, the money is a great point. I don't really see, we'll see what happens with the ACC and all that. But ESPN, usually it's at least for like the Big Ten and the SEC, it was the television companies kind of in their corner to some degree to do this realignment. Well, what reason does ESPN have to do that? They have one of the sweetest deals ever with prominent schools like Clemson and Florida State and North Carolina and some others. And, that's the difference between the ACC situation and the SEC Big Ten situation is, man, because that's such a long contract, there's nobody really in their corner to back them up. And maybe Florida State and Clemson can throw a hand grenade in there and blow it all up. But until that happens, the ball just isn't really in their court, if that makes sense.
All right, so we all know that June is such an active time recruiting-wise. You have on-campus visits all over the place. Penn State's been reeling in players, not just getting commitments for the upcoming year, but even a year beyond that. What's been your take as to how Penn State has handled it, and what's the positional balance that they have with what they've done?
Yeah, positionally wise, they're pretty well set as far as the balance goes. They need to add maybe a couple receivers. We'd love to get a defensive lineman in there. They're shooting really high for a top linebacker like Ty Jackson. Down in Georgia, we'll see. Where that goes. But for the most part, the class is pretty much set. Multiple corners, 2 safeties. I can go through the list. Maybe they would have liked to got another offensive lineman, but Phil Troutwine has also pulled in some quality guys in recent years, and I don't think he's just going to take someone to take someone, if that makes sense when it comes to offensive tackle moving forward. So from that perspective, it's been good. They've really done a good job nationally, too. That's maybe the big difference between what we've seen kind of in recent years and this year. 2 guys out of California. One, of course, is LeVar's kid, so I don't know how much we want to include that as far as like a true California commitment, but Darius Dixon, of course, plays at Mater Dei. Troy Hune, who you alluded to, really good 2026 quarterback prospect, a top 100 player out of Mission Hills, which is closer to San Diego. So you're seeing those. They got a kid out of Kansas. I don't know when the last time Penn State got a player out of Kansas, but Jaden Woods, really good defensive end. We'll see where things progress there. But I think it kind of speaks to the growth of their recruiting staff over the last couple of years and the work that they're able to put in as far as developing those relationships with coaches at different schools, building up that trust over a couple of years. So then when, you do have top players emerge, well, hey man, they've got a really good relationship with Kenny Sanders or Alan Zamitis or, all these recruiting staff guys. And of course that kind of snowballs into the coaching staff as well. So I think that's kind of the biggest takeaway for what we've seen here in recent weeks. Is really just kind of the spreading of their wings and being able to pull off some of those guys that, maybe 4, 5, 6 years ago felt very unlikely. And even to some degree, Darius Dixon committing from Mater Dei, like that was one of those ones where it surprised me pretty much right until the moment it happened.
Right. Everything goes in cycles. So there are some years where Pennsylvania has some decent depth in it. and you need to mine the talent. There are other years where it's a bit shallow, so you have to go other places to find it. Where is Pennsylvania in this particular cycle?
I think it's about mid-range. What I would say about PA is the top's been pretty good. And the issue that I think a lot of fans would point to is that a lot of the top guys ended up elsewhere. Matt Zollers is a really good quarterback out of Springford. We have him as a 5-star. Mm-hmm. He ended up at Missouri. Zahir Mathis, Michael Carroll, Andrew Olish, 3 really good players. Mathis is an edge rusher. Carroll's an O-lineman. Olish is a tight end. They've all picked other schools. What's interesting, first off, we've seen this happen before. If you go back to that 2021 class, Nolan Rucci goes to Wisconsin, McCord and Marvin Harrison go to Ohio State. This does happen every handful of years, and there's a lot of different things you can point to. Sometimes, just the class has a lot of players that, for one reason or another, want to spread their wings. They want to go elsewhere. Right. I think what we're kind of seeing a little bit this year, too, though, is the impact of NIL and just how much it is giving guys a reason to think or want to maybe go elsewhere. Penn State's NIL's okay. It's gotten a lot better, and it's fine. I don't want to make it out to be like it's terrible, because I think a lot of people made it out to be terrible. It's not. But when you have a guy like Matt Zollers, who's an incredible quarterback, well, look, everybody, if you follow this closely, Missouri's NIL collective is one of the best out there now, and it's very well organized, and the way they go about different things. They have the resources to really make an impression. I think that was part of Zollers' decision to go there. Same with Michael Carroll going to Alabama. There's a lot of different guys that, man, if you really look at the top 100 recruits or so in the country, NIL's having a massive impact on them. Sure. And we're seeing in some ways that benefited, maybe not the top tier Georgias and Alabamas, and then some years it kind of helps those kind of schools. And I feel like we're kind of seeing that circle back this year with some of these prominent guys, at least in our region, circling down to some of those SEC schools or some bigger schools that have been very outspoken about the fact that they are going to be incredibly aggressive from an NIL and recruiting perspective. So, the good thing for Penn State is they got 4 or 5 months to try and flip some of these guys, too. I don't know about the PA guys too much. They seem pretty firm, but there's certainly some guys in Maryland who have ended up elsewhere that I know they really like, and they'll continue to chip away at that. But I think Penn State fans, it's funny. I'm going on a tangent real quick. The whole dominate the state conversation, right? I mean, remember, that was 10 years ago. So much has changed since then, and just not just from NIL, but just in the way recruiting staffs are built and how big these staffs are. There is a part of me that feels like fans probably put too much stock into that comment nowadays. They want to point to it when they want to point fingers and do this and that. But, at the end of the day, as long as you're getting talent, which Penn State's doing a fine job with, they're pretty much on pace to finish where they've always finished, at least in recent years, 10 or probably 12, 15 kind of range. As long as you're stacking talent, I don't know how much it really matters that it's from your home state. It's great when it is, right? And fans get excited about that, and they can go watch those guys on Friday nights and watch their careers and all that. But, they're also pulling guys from Arkansas, Florida, California, and all these other places that, 6, 7, 8 years ago, that wasn't always the case. So just keep bringing in talent, keep developing guys. I think at the end of the day, they'll be just fine.
Yeah, every time Drew Aller throws the ball out of the backfield to Katron Allen or tosses one to Trey Wallace, wouldn't get too worked up. All right, none of them are Pennsylvania guys. Okay, Tyler Warren, not a PA guy. I don't worry about that part, because when James made that statement, Penn State is in the throes of sanctions at that moment. I mean, you have to have context to what things mean along the way. So,
right,
and go from there. When you look at the number of guys that they have, and the fact they pushed back this early signing thing to now after the last regular season game, why is it that the SEC, along with the Southern high school coaches, don't want it pushed back to, say, June 30th, for example? Why don't they? Because those
I don't know.
Those are the
I've been trying to figure that out.
Those are the two roadblocks because college basketball's made it work forever.
It's a great question. I've been trying to dig on that. I don't know if you've been able to dig on that. I don't. I'm trying to understand it more. I don't know if it has much to do with, the schools kind of start. Well, no, because if it's in June, I would understand if it was maybe late July, because that's
fine.
Down south. They do start a little earlier,
sure.
But June, I don't understand it at all. And there's got to be some sort of reason. I think maybe to some degree it's because the SEC knows, or at least for the most part, that those schools have more financial backing than others, so maybe they want to flip guys, and they see it as like, look, we have resources here that can probably allow us to get top players committed elsewhere that other schools who don't have those resources currently hold commitments from. But that's a lazy excuse, though, and a lazy way to look at it. I'm sure there's things I'm not thinking about where, some of the more northern schools we're not even talking Penn State, Michigan, Ohio State, but,
sure.
the Purdue's, the Indianas, all those kind of schools of the world, they're looking for those late bloomers senior year. So, they're filling in guys that maybe we're not talking about, we're not thinking about right now, and maybe those SEC schools can pull off talented players off the top of those classes, right? The guys that are kind of marquee. Other than that, I don't get it. I don't understand it at all. I've always been in favor of a June signing period, or just any sort of summer signing period, because, again, Penn State has 22 commits right now. Like, the fact that they got to babysit these guys now for however many months and worry about this or that or visit here and there, it doesn't really help the recruit because it kind of fills their brain sometimes and their families with too many thoughts that they overthink it, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Yeah. And then, just the amount of work that the recruiting staff and all the coaches have to put in, not really visiting guys, but maybe going out and watching high school games, things like that. It just doesn't, I don't understand the benefit of it in 2024. I understood it a little, I would have understood it way more in 2014 and other times where, stats just weren't as big and different things like that. But nowadays, it makes no sense.
Once the House settlement is approved by Judge Claudia Wolkin, Penn State is going to be one of those that will pay the $22 million total, and however they want to dole it out. And that's going to be the low number in all this. It's going to go up at some point. Mm-hmm. But not every school can afford to do that. You and I both know that. I mean, in the Big 12 and in the ACC, you're going to tell me they can afford to find $22 million? How interested are you on the domino as to what that can mean in recruiting?
I'm torn on that, Steve, because I agree with everything you just said there. Like, it doesn't make sense on paper for, like, a school like Maryland, for example. Yeah, what was their profit last year? Like $80 million, or maybe where Penn State was like 120 or something like that. Like, there's a big, maybe not even 80 for Maryland. That actually be lower than that. But at the same time, and if you are committed to being a big time football school,
right?
Like, how do you not do that? Because here's the deal: is collectives aren't going away,
right?
So if you don't commit to that $22 million, you're putting yourself in a bigger hole. In my opinion, it's going to be even tougher than it is right now to compete against some of the big dogs out there.
That's right.
So I'm torn on it, Steve. Like, I think what you're saying is right. Like, no way all of those schools will pay all $22 million, but I don't understand how 90% of them don't, especially if you're in the Big 10 or the SEC. But maybe I'm wrong. Or maybe that won't. But I guess, with Big 12, ACC, it's a little different with their television contracts.
I'm interested to see which sports end up going to club sports at some of those schools in order to curb costs to do exactly what we just talked about. I think that's at least a scenario to consider.
For sure. I don't know if Penn State will ever get to that point, but the money is substantial. And, a school like Penn State would never want to do that. But the money's incredible. I mean, but like the one thing I keep telling fans is, like, if you think that this change is going to fix everything, I don't see that happening, because, look, at the end of the day, Maryland now can spend $22 million potentially. Right. Rutgers can do that. Like, it just makes the pot deeper. It doesn't really widen the gap, in my opinion, or make a Penn State higher up on the chain. Maybe it will. Maybe I'll be wrong, and a lot of these schools will pay, only have $10, $15 million to put into that stuff. But I just don't understand that with all this conference realignment and the schools wanting to be basically in these big three, of course, Big Four with the ACC, but we'll see what happens there. Like, if you're fully committed to that, and you've positioned your school to be in that position, anything less than $22 million, if I'm the coaching staff or recruiting staff or anything like that, that would really frustrate me and not be a winning strategy.
Always a winning strategy to have you on. Thanks so much. Really appreciate it, Ryan. Thanks for the time.
No problem, Steve. Last batch at the end of the month. Reach out then.
Is Keith Pompey joining us. Talk about the Sixers NBA. How are you today, sir?
Hey, I'm doing well. Yourself?
I'm doing great. Thanks for asking. You've been asked 1 billion times about Paul George going to the Sixers, so I will make it 1,000,000,001 about the fit, in your opinion, of Paul George with Maxey and Embiid. How do you feel he fits?
I mean, I feel like he's a pretty good fit. I mean, because when you look at it, like, you look at Paul George, you look at Maxey, you look at Embiid, all three of them are different positions, right? You look at Paul George, he's a guy who brings it on the defensive end. He's a standout wing. He can also handle the ball. And then you see Maxey, a point guard, a combo guard, and Joel Embiid a center. So I think it's a really good fit because, these are three guys who should be able to coexist together because they all bring different things to the game. So I look at Paul as a quality defender, a quality wing defender who can help him out greatly.
Maxey got a terrific deal out of this because of how he's played. You've watched him all the time. Where has he made the improvements to allow us to see what we are seeing now?
Oh, that's a great question. I think the biggest improvement is his ability to run an offense, right? Because when you looked at it before, you said, oh, there's no way in heck that this guy can be a quality point guard. Like maybe he can be like, a guy who can handle the ball at times, but you look at him and you say he can't run an offense. That was the big question mark. So that's been the major, I would like to say that's been the major improvement. We all knew that he could score points. We all knew that he can, hit threes. But I think running an offense has been the biggest improvement that made him become an all-star.
Something that makes the championship teams like Denver and the Celtics is that, yes, they have stars, but the, quote, people that they fit in around them. And in the Celtics case, it's Derek White, it's Drew Holiday, and then guys off the bench like Hauser and, of course, Al Horford. The Sixers have not fit parts around their stars as well. So when you look at the draft, coming in from Duke and the big guy from UCLA, what kind of fit can they be for this team?
They could be pretty good fits. On the guy from UCLA, I don't really expect him to play a lot.
No.
Like I'm looking at him right now, he's going to be the third string center.
Right.
But his name is Bona, Adem Bona. But when you look at the guy from Duke, his name is Jarrett McCann. I look to him to have a vital role, to play a key role for them, because in him, he's a guy who can have that come off the bench, stretch a defense. When Maxey's off the floor and other people, you can spread the floor and try to let them go to work. But the thing is, the biggest role is when you look at the Sixers when they had Jimmy Butler, they had J.J. Redick. J.J. Redick was like the sharpshooter.
Yes.
I see him coming in and being that, coming off of screens, hitting shots. So to me, that's his biggest role. Now, again, part of the problem is like him and Maxey, that's a really, really small backcourt.
Yes.
So he's not going to start. He's going to come off the bench. But for right now, for a championship team, his best asset is his ability to shoot. And also, he's a winner. Like, he gets after it. But Bona, the guy, the center that they got in the second round, I don't, like, if you got to play him a lot of minutes, I think the Sixers may be in trouble.
Yeah,
that's not a knock against him.
No.
But when you have Joel Embiid and you have Andre Drummond as your first two centers, Bona's going to be a guy who, an insurance policy, so to speak.
He's going to have a good view of the game because it's going to be on the sideline.
Yeah.
I thought Andre Drummond was a good pickup. What was your thought on that?
Oh, he was a huge pickup, and it's funny because after they traded him, it was weird. Like, they traded him, and then all of a sudden they go to the playoffs, and Joel gets injured. And they're like, wow, here we go. Like, I mean, literally, Joel got injured that first playoff series, and then he missed the first 2 games, I believe, in that one, in the second round. So it's like they've been trying to get him back since. I mean, they were, and this past season, they thought they had a trade for him, and it fell through in the final second. But him, you look at him, he's going to be a huge benefit because the Sixers, when you look at the 76ers, they were a team who struggled mightily in rebounding. And you look at Andre Drummond, that's what he does. He's a great rebounder. Also, he's a starter level center. He's been a backup. He was a multi-time All-Star. But when he comes in there, it's kind of like you have a guy, you're not going to utilize him the same way you utilize Joel. But at the same time, you have a guy that, can still score points, can do things. And you don't have to worry about on the defensive end of getting abused and getting out rebounds and things like that. So he's a great pickup. As much as we talk about Paul George, don't get me wrong.
Right.
Paul George is huge. But when you look at Drummond and you look at the weaknesses that they've had when Embiid didn't play, being able to get that guy was extremely vital for the Sixers' success.
All right, I want to ask you now about the single most talked about second-round pick in the history of the NBA. and I know you're in Salt Lake. All right, so you're not down in Vegas to see any of this live. But look, Dalton Knecht was the Lakers' first-round pick. And I thought that was a good first-round pick, by the way. I thought that was a good first-round pick. Yeah, I agree. In fact, I'll go with you. I thought it was a great pick. So I have zero issue as to whether he was the second-round pick, 55th overall. I mean, let's be realistic about what the NBA draft is. But he has so much hype around him. What's just your general thought on how it played out and where he is with his game?
It's weird. Like, you get it. Like, you understand, a year ago. Let's go back a year ago, right? When LeBron said, hey, I would love playing with my son.
Right.
And at that point, everyone knew that you had a sense. You didn't know, but you felt like the Sixers were going to draft him, right? I'm not the Sixers. I'm sorry, the Lakers. You felt like the Lakers were going to draft this guy.
Right.
But then all of a sudden, it's like this comes out, and it became. And I was at the pre-draft camp, right? In Chicago.
Yeah.
And it became one of those things where no one cared about the other lottery picks or any of the lottery picks. It was all about him. I mean, he was the headliner. But then when the game came out, you look at it and you say, wow. He's struggling a little bit. I mean, he's not playing well. And then when we get to the draft and you get to everything and you're saying to yourself, like, they're saying we don't want anybody else to draft him, this and that, da-da-da. And it's like, wow, this is a lot of hype for a guy who's typically a late second-round pick. And now you go and you see how he's playing now, how he played in that one game, and he struggled. In a way, you feel sorry for the guy, but at the same time, you feel like he's being set up for failure.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is it's kind of like, is the more that they talk about him, the more like money that he gets, the more that he's like being treated like a lottery pick. It's kind of sort of, in my opinion, could backfire on the kid. Because right now, like you said, think about it. Have you ever talked about a 55 pick from another team? I mean, not in Pennsylvania on your show?
No.
You know what I mean? So this it's just one of those things where I feel like he's going to be set up. If everything that he does is going to be, dissected, and every time they do stuff, like for instance, he struggled, and they came out and then what was it? Well, we don't care about what he does in summer league. It doesn't matter. So it just seems like people are putting a bullseye on this kid. They don't realize it, but they are. They're putting a bullseye on him.
I agree with all of that. And the part about him, because I watched, because with USC coming into the Big Ten, I tried to take a little bit of time in the past season to take a look at Oregon, Washington, UCLA, and USC just to get at least a feel for them. That's like Bona, for example. I saw him play a couple times for UCLA. Well, that also meant that Bronny James played, and the part about him I just can't tell is how much he was affected by the cardiac arrest and all the time that he missed. And I just don't know how that figures into what we're even seeing right now, because he hasn't really played a lot in the last year.
Yeah, and that's a good point, because you look at it, and initially when he made the McDonald's All-American game, right? Yeah. Before all that happened, you're saying, wow, that's crazy. How did he make it? He's the 66th, recruit in the country. So he passed on up. Yeah. But then in that game, he played well. He actually played well in the McDonald's All-American game. Like, he wasn't a superstar, but he was knocking down threes, and it looked like, he belonged, right? Yeah. So then he has that, the cardiac arrest, and then he's struggling. But, it's weird, so we don't know. But at the same time, if it was another kid, we have to be honest with ourselves.
That's
with the stats that he put up. They would have said, hey, son, it's your best bet to stay in stay in school another year to prove yourself.
That's right.
But, he didn't have to. So, I don't know how much that impacted, but at the same time, you have to realize that he did get some special privileges because of who he is.
Right. And I think what you said is so spot on and it's part the Lakers, it's part LeBron, and it's absolutely part ESPN.
No doubt.
They're setting up. You're right. They're setting him up for failure. He won't be able to do enough for anybody because of what's happened from those three entities that's not allowing him to be him.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I do believe that too, because it's one of those things where in the perfect world, you get him. You may give you give him his money, what have you, and you say, okay, he's going to be a couple years. He's going to be a project. He goes down to the G League, this and that. Now, who knows? That may be the plan. But the more media attention that he gets, and the more that you got people up there vouching for him and saying stuff, and then bringing up things like, "Hey, this isn't, this is nepotism," but there's been nepotism in the league for years. Yeah, it's been this and it's been that, and yada yada. Now, listen, I'm just going to say this: I had some guys who I went to college with, and their fathers were like, CEO. One guy in particular, his dad was a CEO. Mm-hmm. And we all knew after he graduated that he was going to be, a big wig in the business, right? But at the same time, he did. Now, who knows? I don't know what his grade point average was, but at the same time, he did graduate, right? He graduated and he did stuff. And to this day, he's still a successful businessman. But he's been able to hold his own after that, right? Yeah. So to me, it's like when the ESPN and other people keep making these excuses, it's kind of like, well, why do we have to bring this up? Like, why are you making excuses? And secondly, there's been other father-son tandems in the NBA, right? But, they didn't make the excuses. They didn't do it. Think about it. Look at Steph Curry. Yeah. We're talking about a kid, Steph Curry, whose father, Dale, was a great, sharpshooter. Yep. And this thing. Steph Curry, North Carolina, even though his dad was the man, North Carolina and Duke didn't even give him a scholarship.
That's right.
He goes to Davidson, and he made a name for himself, right? You understand what I'm saying? Like, so things like that happen. You look at Dominique Wilkins. He had his brother, Gerald Wilkins, had a son who ended up going to playing. I believe he played at NC State.
He did.
And then from there, he had a year, and he had a couple years in the NBA. So, but nothing was built up the way this one was. And I think that the hype and making excuses, and sometimes it comes down to people want to stay in good grace. They don't want, like LeBron, they don't want LeBron's camp saying, we don't want to deal with y'all. So what they'll do is they'll talk and they'll make excuses and say whatever they can, just so when that something happens, they'll be one of the first people or first persons to get that text message.
Right.
You know what I mean? So it is what it is, but at the same time, it's unfortunate because what they're doing is a lot of guys now, and y'all know it happens. You're going to go up against a guy who feels like he's been slighted, and they're going to go at this kid, and they're going to try to embarrass the kid. You know what I mean? It's like the kid suddenly becomes a bullseye. And I'm going to tell you this. I was there in Chicago, interviewed him. He's the type of kid that when you talk to him and this and that, you are pulling for this guy.
Right.
I mean, I was pulling for him, and I still am. I mean, he seems like a great young man.
Yep.
But you're right. All this attention is just putting a bullseye on the kid.
Final question. It's not going to be about him. You go to a summer league. You go to a summer league game with that trained eye of yours. Keith, what do you look for in a summer league game? Fans are looking for something. What are you looking for, if anything?
It's crazy. I remember the first time I was there, I was like covering it like it was an NBA game, and the other reporters were like, dude, what are you doing? Half of these guys aren't going to be here. Like 80% of them. So a lot of times I look at it and see what a guy worked on, right?
Right.
Like, for instance, Ricky Council yesterday was phenomenal, and he played well. Coming in, he made 5 or 10 threes. Beforehand, that wasn't a strong suit of his when he got drafted a year ago.
That's right.
So that tells me how much work he put in on his game and how, it's not. So it's things like that I look at. I look at, now again, the guy Jared McCann, he's supposed to be a shooter. He came in as a shooter. Now, his shot wasn't falling, but I was looking to see how could he run an offense, the tenacity he brings, other things that he can do on the floor. Now, again, the competition level isn't going to be as good as it is, not even in the preseason, right? But those are the type of things that you want to see. And a lot of times when you got a first-round pick, are they going to dominate? Now, there was a kid who went from Philadelphia who went to Kentucky. Now, he was an undrafted guy, but he was one of the nation's top recruits the year before. And you look at him and you want to see aggressiveness. You don't want to see a guy who's just fitting in. And unfortunately, he didn't show that. He was just trying to fit in. So those are the things that you look at more so than points. It's just that if it's a veteran, a first-year guy or second-year guy, what did he work on in the off season? The other guy, what can he do when his shot isn't falling? Can he lead an offense? Can he still put an imprint on the game? And then those other guys who have question marks, you want to see them be aggressive. So those are the things that I look for. The games are really, meaningless to me. The score of the game, rather. Right. But it's what they do individually.
Yeah, they were Justin Edwards, probably the Kentucky guy, right?
Yeah. I'm sorry for not naming him.
No. That's fine. Just so everybody knows, if you win the summer league, you don't get a parade. And the competition in practice, when they get to the preseason, just in practice, is going to be better than this. All right, so.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly right. Before I go, I just want to say, I remember my first summer league. I'm looking at these guys. I'm seeing all these dudes, who came in from overseas and were ex-NBA players. And I'm like, hey, this is going to be great. And I'm like, well, how come they ain't playing? And the guy said, man, they just got them there for practice. Like, they just practice players. And I was like, oh, so this is what summer league is like. They're like, yeah, dude, that's all it is.
Yeah, it's all it is. It's televised practices. All right.
Exactly.
Keith, always a pleasure. Great perspective. Appreciate you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate being on the show.